This is Trepp Wire Week in Review for week ending November 13th. I'm Martha Kocher with Trepp, a data modeling and analytics firm for the CMBS commercial real estate and CLO markets. I'm with Manus Clancy, Senior Managing Director, and Joe McBride, Head of CRE Finance. This week, President-elect Biden has started to build his transition team with the two chief concerns being the virus and economic recovery. COVID hospitalizations in the U.S. are at their highest ever, resulting in many states announcing new restrictions. On the economic front, new jobless claims are at their lowest since March. Consumer prices were flat, and several third quarter REIT earnings calls cited improved rent collections as signs of recovery. But perhaps the biggest news was the Pfizer announcement that its clinical trial data shows its vaccine is highly effective, which resulted in the stock soaring on Monday. Manus, a vaccine that is more than 90% effective would change the game for commercial real estate, which has been hit hard. What would a post-vaccine world look like? Let's start with hotels.
Well, it's very interesting. I think that, certainly on Monday, it was risk on for many stocks. We saw 30% jumps in things like cruise ship operators, airlines, casinos, even shopping mall operators saw big bumps on Monday. So people across the investing spectrum really saw this as kind of being the light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, there was kind of a rotation out of some big name tech stocks, including Zoom and others that had been big beneficiaries of the stay-at-home lockdown. We're at a very interesting period right now because it seems like stay-at-home is gaining momentum with new edicts being put out in New York and Chicago. So it could be a very bumpy 3 months, but hopefully if we get a vaccine and it's as effective as advertised and distribution is thorough, then we are really at the cusp of the end of this. So what does the end look like? Back to your original question. I think that the rebound for certain hotel owners and certain hotels will be incredible. And those that I would put in that particular category would be leisure destinations. I think there's extraordinary pent-up demand for places like Orlando and Las Vegas. And I think that the minute you could fly safely, people are loading up on airline tickets for spring break, their kids' spring break, anything and everything, having gone a year without any kind of meaningful vacation in most cases. So I think that those are the winners in this whole thing. And I think that the spend will be enormous. In fact, as an anecdote, people were texting me during that miserable Jets-Patriots game the other night, my buddies I grew up with, all wondering if it was safe to start booking a Vegas trip for the end of March Madness in April. So clearly 9 other guys like me had that on the mind while they were watching football on Monday. The losers, I think, in the short term or the longer to rebound, I think would be more business destinations. What I'm concerned about is that financial officers, CEOs, and so forth have seen how much money they can be saving from backing off on conferences, business travel, expensive junkets, if you will. So I think places like, New York, Chicago, Houston and New York in particular had overbuilding before COVID. I think they'll be very slow to come back, and they will lag the market.
No more boondoggles, Manus?
Some boondoggles, but I think that
no more leadership programs.
It'll be boondoggle light in 2021.
No more, sales trainings in Bermuda or anything like that.
We can only hope. I mean, the trade organization CREFC always threw a great South Beach conference in mid-January, which came just at the right time when New York weather was at its worst. And it was usually 3 or 4 days of meeting old friends and having mimosas and mojitos. That's the other one I was thinking of, with nice weather. And that's off for this year, but I'm looking forward to the time when we can get back together, should the purse strings be loosened.
I pulled the working man's Crefsey Miami trip last year. I flew down super early Monday morning and flew out late Tuesday night. So I was just, it was not as fun for me as it was for most people who go down, make a weekend out of it. I was thinking that the turkeys must be a huge fan of Cuomo and Lightfoot, right? I mean, they're essentially, in Chicago, they said they're canceling Thanksgiving. So what are we going to do with all these extra turkeys, right? Like, is there some sort of real estate play where they need housing or something? Too dumb of a question.
But I'll pivot back to Crefsey for 1 minute before we move on to the next topic. And at the end of this, by the way, Joe and I will be giving our predictions for where the Trepp delinquency rate will be by property type as of June 30th, 2021. We'll give that at the end of the segment for each of the major property types. But a couple of years ago at Crefsey, Clemson and Alabama met for the second time in the national championship game when Deshaun Watson was still a quarterback for Clemson. And there is a member of the community, the CMBS community, who I won't name, but he's been a longtime member and a longtime friend, who was a Clemson alum who chose to drive from Miami to Tampa to be part of the festivities to see Clemson win their national title in, I guess it was 2016, with that great finish with the pass to Hunter
Renfro. I remember that. So
yes.
I had Jersey Shore, Myrtle Beach, kind of, I would say, drive away destinations as my spot. Like, if you were picking your spots, right, where would you want to be? And you said, tourist/vacation destinations. I think to be even safer, you stay away from the flyaway destinations, at least at first, because I think people are still going to take some time to get used to flying, even post-vaccine, and being stuck in that cabin versus renting a car or taking your car for a 3-4 hour drive. So Virginia Beach and those types of things, I think, and whatever the equivalent is, on the West Coast and in near Chicago or whatever it may be, maybe the Ozarks, right?
I mean, there's all these little areas that have niches in the hotel market that have been just completely obliterated over the last 9 months. And I'm thinking places like Marlborough, Mass, and outside of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia suburbs, and Albany, New York, where they cater to, all summer long AAU basketball tournaments for boys and girls. And then in the winter, it's hockey tournaments every weekend. And that would be another segment of the market that, with the flip of a switch, all of a sudden they're back in business, and AAU basketball is going, and every weekend there's a tournament, and you're bringing in teams, 64 teams from around the Northeast, and you're back in business. So if these guys can hang on for another 3 months, there is, I think for many of these owners, light at the end of the tunnel.
If anyone out there that's a listener was at 5-star basketball camp in Honesdale, Pennsylvania around 2005, give us a shout out. You just gave me the chills, man, as thinking about all the tournaments and the baseball and the basketball and the travel and how it can come back now. I can't wait. It's going to be amazing.
My recollection of that is way too many Applebee's bloomin' onions and 2,700 calorie after tournament meals with other parents that were equally unhealthy as I was.
So before we move on to retail, any other thoughts on hotels at this point?
I just can't wait.
And
I think the business travel thing is definitely true, but I also think there's going to be a similar snapback. Not similar. I would say there's going to be a snapback, not to the same extent, but you have to think that there are sales guys and client service folks and, partnership people and everything else that are just, they're dying to go out and get on the road again. I think some people are built to be on the road, and there's a lot of people in that category in our world that are going to at least start to try,
Well, the other side of the coin is it takes two to tango. So you may have a sales guy eager to travel, but if he's going to a place where people are working 3 days a week because that's
right.
the new normal,
yeah,
right, it becomes harder to pull off that 4 nights in the upper Midwest when you're bouncing from Indianapolis to Minneapolis to Ann Arbor to Columbus.
That's right.
Well,
That's
I'm
right.
curious, Manus, after the vaccine is widely distributed, how much does the process we've seen applied to hotels stick around after a vaccine, right? The touchless check-in, not having to go to a front desk, curbside, engagement. Does that stay after we've got a vaccine?
As long as it's cheaper than the other option.
Yeah, that's the sad
Right.
part. A lot of these efficiency gains that have been put in place by retailers and hotel operators and so forth may mean the end of certain jobs that have been, out there for people across middle America. And that would be sad, if we get rid of the bellhop and the valet and other things. Let's hope not, because this economy not only needs things to open, but they need people to spend money and they need people to provide jobs.
So let's move on to retail, which obviously was already going through a shift from brick and mortar to omni-channel online. What happens now?
Well, it's probably,
I don't see
this was
much changing. I
Yeah.
think the thesis is the same as before, right? It's just faster.
yeah, I think that, with malls, they were on life support, those Class B and Class C malls for quite some time. They've seen many of their inline stores as well as anchors go bankrupt in the process, reject tons of leases, in some cases renegotiate leases. Beyond that, we're not going to have a vaccine ahead of Christmas, so this probably seems like another bust of a season for shopping malls. Any hope of kind of getting back into the game in 2020 with a big Christmas is unlikely. And as we've said before on the podcast, once somebody goes to e-commerce, they tend to stay e-commerce, right? Once you stop going to in-person shopping and you become an Amazon Prime or a Walmart delivery shopper, you rarely go back. So I think the malls are in a heap of trouble and remain that way. Although I should point out that on Monday, when we had the vaccine, CMBX 6 BBB minus rallied 200 basis points to the disappointment of the legendary Carl Icahn, who's Mr. CMBX 6 short. I think the places to be will be the places that we have always thought were sustainable during COVID: grocery anchored, home improvement, Walmart, Target. Although for the home improvement side, it could mean the end of the race for the suburbs that we've seen over the last 6 months. And it probably helps out to a large degree those strip malls that are not anchored by grocery, places that have a nail salon, a pizza shop, a barber, and 2 or 3 other things that are heavy touch type destinations. Those places have probably been really decimated over the last year, and now they have some hope of reestablishing a tenant base and a clientele.
Yeah, I don't think, like, I'm not smart enough to know what the knock-on effects of this COVID thing are in retail, other than everything we've already talked about even before COVID. All right, it just accelerated things, especially in the mall space. I don't know. Like, I liked what Sternlicht. We'll talk about Sternlicht and Starwood a little bit later, but he had one line. He had a bunch of good lines. He shoots from the hip on the earnings calls, which I appreciate. He said, "Don't confuse pandemic behavior with the long-term social behavior of human beings." So, he was talking about people coming back to their offices and stuff like that, and people are still going to want to go to the barbershop, the nail salon, the laundromat, the dry cleaner, right? The Subway, the Starbucks, the blah, blah, blah. But I don't think anyone's going back to the Macy's or the JCPenney or the mall generally. But that's not any different than pre-COVID. So I don't know. There's nothing really new to say there for me anyway.
Let's look at office. A delinquency rate of only 2.5% that we've seen in the last month, but there is concern in this space.
Well, I think going back to Sternlicht's remarks, when he says you can't separate COVID behavior from human behavior. I agree with that when it comes to things like Starbucks and haircuts and nail salons and so forth. But I do think that we may be at an inflection point where people have become so accustomed to not having that hour or hour and a half commute every day that there may be an enormous gravitational pull towards people going to the office every other week, or 3 days on, 2 days off, something like that. And that is really the big concern with the office. And I'll give an anecdote right now, which ties back to our Trepp Wire commentary, something we'll be writing about on Friday morning. It regards a State Farm sales leaseback loan that was originated in 2014. The loan, $383 million. So it's a big loan, and it is split across 4 2014 CMBS deals. The loan made in 2014, as I said, State Farm is the sole tenant, 14 separate properties. The loan has an anticipated maturity date of 2024 and a final maturity date of 2029. And State Farm is in place until shortly before that final maturity date. We're talking about offices in places like Charlottesville, Virginia, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Malta, New York, Birmingham, Alabama, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Prior to yesterday, State Farm had already said that they were closing 4 of these 14 offices. Yesterday came out word that they'd be closing the rest of these offices. So over the next 4 or 5 years, all 14 of these offices appear to be on their way to closure. So we have $383 million worth of debt outstanding on this, in a situation where the campuses were probably really catered to a State Farm operation, and now they're going to be completely vacant. And that's really takes us back to the office dynamic, which is, part of this, to be fair, State Farm has been trying to grow its presences in Phoenix and Atlanta for some time. So some of this was a little bit predictable, but some of these closures are basically keeping the workforce in place in places like Tennessee and having them work from home, because they think that's just as efficient as being in the office. And that's the scary thing with the office dynamic, which is the operator, the lessee of the space just says, we don't need this anymore. And that's really, quite concerning.
So nobody should take this as a good idea or good advice, but I could convince myself, if I had enough time and energy, of not necessarily co-working, but the modular office, or the convene type office, where, take Trepp, not that this is what we would do, but a company like us where we have a whole floor, we've got, 6 or 7 conference rooms and a bunch of trading desk type setups, and all this space, a big kitchen and everything else. I mean, in the future, it's possible that you may only need 2 or 3 really nice conference rooms with a really great entrance for the reception desk. And then maybe you have 20 desks back in, hidden in the back. And that's all you need, because you still want that presence, especially in the capital markets. You want to have that amazing first impression when you get out of the elevator and you're kind of, you have investors showing up to your office. You want them to be impressed, but that's all you need, right? You need the entrance, you need a few conference rooms, and maybe you have kind of a hotel system for the desks, and that's it, right? I could see that being the new normal.
Well, before Donald Trump was president, when he was, the apprentice guy, if you recall, the office would turn into a whole little amphitheater during the closing episode. He would be in the office trying to pick the final apprentice, and as he was picking them, the walls would open and it would, reveal something that looked like Radio City Music Hall. So if you can design something like this, Joe, I think you're off to the races. Something where you just kind of push a button and some walls move around, and it transforms from a bunch of cubicles to a really nice office, just with a push of a button.
You fired. I think that there's also a definite case to be made, which for the other way around, which is look at what Facebook and Amazon and everyone else has been doing in the office space, the tech firms. They've been using this opportunity, I think, to buy buildings and also to lease massive amounts of square footage, especially in New York City. So they're long on office workers, right? And people being in the office to work. So if the super duper, cutting edge tech world still thinks there's value to being in person, I think the law firms and the services firms and the others have to eventually realize that there is value to being in person. But definitely, if you have a process type job, right, where you're doing the same thing every day, you may be working from home for a much longer time than just until June or July.
I think it's a big question mark. I think you look at Twitter, who said that they're never expecting their employees to come back, and they've put space on for sublet. And you look at Facebook, who said live anywhere you want, although if you live someplace with a lower cost of living, we're going to pay you less.
Right.
So clearly, I think that there's a mixed bag at this point, and it's really hard to say where it goes. I don't have a firm grasp on this, other than to say that I think that people in places where there's less tech sophistication and people are less, used to using Zoom or became accustomed to it, and also places where people have shorter commutes, I think that those are more likely to be kind of back in person as opposed to a more tech savvy workspace. Before we move on to the next topic, I just wanted to clarify a couple of things about the State Farm loan. I mentioned the term ARD, which is an anticipated repayment date loan for those that don't know it. They're seen here and there in the CMBS space. And what that means is the borrowers expect to pay the loan back in 2024. But if they don't, it doesn't turn into a default by the borrower. What it means is that the loan will flip to a new interest rate, and all cash will be captured and amortized down the balance until the legal maturity date in this case would be 2029. So that's what an ARD loan is, and that was structured as such. So if the borrower can't refinance this in 2024, which may be hard given State Farm's planned departures, closings, they may just hold on to this amortized down the loan and see how it goes.
Well, that kind of springs to mind. There was an article in CMA last week about underwriters at banks and other lending institutions kind of slightly tapping the brakes on office loans because of these types of situations, right? Where in the past, it was pretty easy to underwrite an office loan because you had really long-term tenants, and you could, with reasonable accuracy, put in a probability of renewal and how much space they're going to take, and put in some sort of estimate of increase or decrease in per square foot rents. But now that renewal and or retenant, if there is no renewal, is much more in doubt, right? Are you going to be able to fill 200,000 square feet of space if Citigroup leaves your building or whatever it might be, These
office campuses have kind of a checkered past in CMBS. We've seen some massive losses.
So was there a GE one at some point?
There was a GE. It doesn't jump out at me as my recollection. Three that do. One was there was an Office Max headquarters in Naperville, Illinois, $49 million loan. Once they got up and left after their merger with Office Depot, a $43 million loss. So, just 88%, 87%, whatever that turns out to be. The telecom firm SBC had a huge campus in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. They vacated $200 million loan, $100 million loss. Bristol Myers Squibb in Plainsboro, New Jersey, three or four different buildings in that town, $173 million loan, $130 million loss. So, these types of things, when they start to unfold and leadership says, we want a different headquarters or a different campus, reconstituting this as something different is not always easy. So certainly a loan to keep an eye on.
Looking at multifamily, by the numbers, it was just under 3% delinquency. What does it look like post-vaccine?
I think that it's great for anybody out of the 24-hour cities. I think it's great for the student housing population. That particular market, that's interesting for us because at this point, I had expected to see a lot of defaults in student housing loans. I thought that we would see a real retrenchment in the number of students coming back, and therefore a lot of vacancies, and therefore a lot of defaults in student loan properties. We have yet to see a wave of that type. At this point, now that we're into November, you would think that anybody that was suffering would now be suffering for 3 months due to lower occupancy. We haven't seen it. So that has been resilient, and that would become even more resilient with a COVID vaccine. I think in secondary and tertiary markets, that only makes those markets stronger. They've been quite resilient as well during the COVID process. But I do think that if you're concerned about office in 24-hour cities, then you absolutely have to be concerned about multifamily in those cities, because if office attendance is not mandatory, then why pay in New York City the $3,000 a month you need for a single bedroom in the Upper East Side that you're splitting with somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I think that multifamily and industrial have been the bells of the ball throughout COVID and even pre-COVID. Multifamily, there have been issues, but they've mostly been held at bay by aggressive moves by Fannie and Freddie to forbear for properties that needed forbearance, and that also agreed not to evict folks. I wonder, I mean, multifamily may skate by here, right? I mean, we talked last week about asking rents. I shouldn't say asking rents, but like listings of multifamily or apartments in Manhattan. What was it, down a median of 11%? And then there were lots of like anecdotal stories about one bedroom that was renting for $4,000 was now on the market for $1,800 or $2,000, right? So like there are some really serious drops, but maybe the landlords are thinking that they'll be able to get by, right? That they'll be able to raise those rents really quickly, starting in 21 when people start to come back to work. The young people who still want to live in cities and hang out with each other and go to the office are still going to be there, I think. And, I was thinking about the office thing too. If it would be funny if, there's some sort of optional 3-2 work thing, or you come in 1 week, you don't come in the next week. I still think the 23-year-old to 26-year-old who's living in a studio apartment in Hoboken is probably thinking, that office with the free oatmeal, right, and the free coffee is better than sitting in my crummy apartment. So you might have a Lord of the Flies situation in the office. All the executives are home, hour and a half away in Westchester and Long Island and New Jersey, and all the kids are in the office causing trouble. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to work out, but
would that make Keegan piggy?
That would make the what
Who
is
would
it
have
called?
The conch?
I was going to say, what's the conch? It's the coffee machine is the conch. But anyway, yeah, multifamily. I mean, again, Sternlicht. Again, I'll talk a little bit about what he said. He was, they have a large investment in rent stabilized and kind of Section 8 government subsidized housing, and that's always a good place to be because the rental payments are usually relatively guaranteed. I don't think that's going to change. I think the super high end might have some issues, because why pay $15,000 a month to live in Manhattan when the restaurants aren't open yet? But I think multifamily will mostly be fine, right? I'm kind of searching for potential threads here, but I don't think there are many.
Well, the landlords are giving concessions. In many instances, they're giving two months of rent free if you sign, a 1-year contract.
Totally. But I think that maybe they won't have to do that 3 months from now. they had to do that during this time, but they might be able to aggressively get back to, maybe not all the way back, but back to, if they're down 10 to 15% now, maybe they get down only 7 or 8%,
So let's go to the predictions. I'll rattle off the current rates. Joe, you give me where you think it's going to be on June 30th.
Well, I want to hear where you should be too, Manus, right? We said it for hotels, right? Destination and drive away type places. So we got to do that for office and multifamily, I think.
Well, multifamily, I think if you're investing, you want to be in those secondary and tertiary markets. And I think you want to be at least get a risk premium for New York City office for sure. Right. I think especially if you have a near term, short duration rent roll, I think that you have to be rewarded for that. That being said, one of our deals of the week, which I'll intersperse it here, the Grace Building in Manhattan refinanced this week. It is a 1.6 million square foot office in Midtown Manhattan. It's on 42nd Street between 5th and 6th, so between Grand Central and Times Square for non-New Yorkers. For New Yorkers, it's the building that has the sloped front.
It's the thing that didn't the guy ski down it in Superman 3?
It looks like like a really extreme skateboard park. So it's the Grace Building. It's owned by the Swig Company and Brookfield, and they were able to refinance at a 58 LTV, 10-year debt, 2.75%. So for guys looking for benchmarks to that market, that would be about 200 basis points over the 10-year Treasury around the time. The 10-year Treasury is now a little bit higher, but around the time that the deal was announced. So if you're looking for a benchmark for where you can get spread or what kind of spread you would have to quote to get this type of loan done, it's about 200 basis points. DSCR on the new loan, 1.6. So, there's not a big risk premium for something that I think at the moment is about 74% occupied. It used to house HBO.
But that's like a trophy, well-known office building. You're not getting that for something on Lex, right?
No, you're not. But 200 basis points seems a really tight spread for something in an environment where you don't 10-year fixed, where you don't know where occupancies are going, rents are going, and you have 26% of the property still vacant. So bully for them for getting it. I think that's great. Bully for those that took a bet on New York and are going to invest in this deal. The deal, by the way, it was the loan was written by Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, and B of A. And B of A is a tenant there as well.
All right, so let's do predictions. Let's just establish some rules here because we're going to go back and grade you eventually. You're all not only going to give us the delinquency rate for each of the property sectors. In other words, you're not just going to tell us it's higher or lower. You're going to give us an exact.
No, we're going to give us you're going to give the number, 2 decimal points, please.
Beautiful.
2 decimal point number.
All right, let's go.
Right.
Closest without going over.
No. Closest. This is not Price is Right.
It's Price is Right rules.
R.I.P. Alex Trebek. I know it's not.
No,
I know that's not
Bob
Price is Right, but still. All right. So lodging first. I'll go, Manus. The October number was 19.43%. I'm saying July 21, but end of June 21, same thing. I'm going 6.8%. That's a 65% drop over the next 7 months or so.
By July.
We would call you the Super Bowl.
That's right.
Yeah.
I would say I'm going to put it at 15.00%.
Well, you've always been a bear.
I will. Yes, I think.
No, I'm an optimist, man. I just think that we learned our lesson from the great financial crisis that these things are slow to resolve. And some of these things are already REO, so they will linger for a while. It's kind of a bet on this just takes a longer time. I think that 6% will get there, just not as fast as you think.
Call it youthful exuberance.
Retail.
October number is 14.33%. I am saying by July 21 or end of June, 7.17%.
Whoa.
Yep.
Wow.
I'm going like full bore stimulus, Pfizer vaccine, snapback, roaring 20s. Let's go.
16.50.
You're going up.
Yeah, they're
I'm
not
going
coming
up.
back. They're not
I'm
coming
going
back.
up. I just think that, between the Preet news and the CBL news, it means more properties are coming back. I think we've historically seen that the end of the holiday season means new waves of store closings from big anchors. They try to make it through, squeeze out as much money as they can, and that's when the wave of store closings come. We haven't yet seen list number 2 from JCPenney, which should emerge once they come out of bankruptcy. And by 6 months from now, a lot of these borrowers are 6 months closer to that maturity date, and they're starting to see the writing on the wall. So, yeah.
So we're breaking all of the rules of economic forecasting right now.
How so?
Well, we're giving an actual number and an actual date, right? So you can't hold this against us if we're completely wrong. And by we, I mean me.
You know what?
I'm either going to look really, really smart and maybe slightly contrarian, or we'll just forget that this ever happened.
No, we'll get people to listen a year from
Someone's
now.
going to give me a bunch of crap about these predictions on
You know
at
what?
podcast@trepp.com, and I'm open to it.
We're going full Francesa. If you blow this, we'll just bury this. Nobody will ever be able to find this episode.
Oh, let's do office. Okay. 2.49% in October. I am going to say 4.15.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm gonna buck you on that one too. I'm gonna go just marginally higher, 2.75.
Industrial. We didn't talk about that.
Oh, we didn't talk about
It's
industrial.
It's a hotbed.
I'll go
right
first
now.
on this one, so Joe can't say
What's
that.
the starting point?
1.53.
1.53 in October.
I'm going to say we're back down again. I'm saying we're back to 1.10.
I'm going to say flat.
Nice. All right.
1.53 still.
Nice. All right. Well, there you have. We
Because you
have
can't agree. We didn't do multifamily.
multifamily 2.95 in October. What is it next year?
3.30.
Oh, I had 3.10. We should have written these down and gave them to Keegan to keep us honest.
I think
I
he
had
has them.
3.10.
I'm pretty sure he's got them.
I'm already regretting my 3.10. I actually think it's going to get better. 2.75.
Look at that. Can't edit it.
You can't change.
No. All right.
No takebacks.
All right. Quickly. We've seen the Q3 earnings from Starwood and Brookfield. There were some interesting takeaways. Joe, let's cover some of those because I think a lot of people were watching those.
Yeah. So did I talk about this last week? I have this very cool new app for nerds where you can actually they collate all of the earnings reports and the not the reports, the earnings calls. So you can listen to them on your phone. So I was listening to the soothing voice of Rena Pineri and Barry Sternlicht today. And I took a few notes here. So a couple of things I found interesting. So they, according to their calculations, their stock is trading at 66% of their GAAP book value. And their average loan to value ratio on the loans that this is Starwood now, on the loans that they have is around 60 to 65%. So, they made the point that buying their stock is like buying their loans at 40 cents on the dollar. They emphasized, which I found very interesting, they multiple times mentioned that they had little to no exposure in San Francisco and Manhattan, which historically would be kind of a funny thing to say. I don't have any exposure to the best performing markets, but now, of course, things have turned around. So I think they also said that their liquidity is very strong. They actually are in energy infrastructure as well, which was an interesting wrinkle there. And they've started using new non-recourse, non-mark-to-market warehouse financing. That might be an educational segment at some point. But here's a couple of the quotes from Sternlicht. He said, "We're on a path to recovery. A stimulus package will happen. A new normal will happen, but people will come back to the office, especially our office." And I said this before, but Don't confuse pandemic behavior with the long-term social behavior of human beings. He talked about New York City, and he said they have a mayor there who's bordering on insanity. If there's anybody who's brought people together in this time, it's been Mayor Bill de Blasio. They also asked him about the American Dream Mall in New Jersey, which is the old Xanadu. And he made a kind of a funny remark about if the Jets would only win a game or two, maybe more people would be in the parking lot for the American Dream Mall. But he also talked about how they're in a very senior position, lending to that, more of a entertainment venue than really a shopping venue. That's kind of how they were underwriting it. So there's a lot of kind of equity and subordinate debt cushion below them, and they feel very comfortable with that. So there was a lot of other stuff in there, but those were kind of my highlights that I took out of it.
Yeah, they're a really well-run company, incredibly diversified now. They have residential, they have commercial, they have conduit, which they kind of pump through the system. I was really impressed that on a couple of levels, they said that they didn't panic during the early COVID days. They had many pre-COVID loans that they could have securitized early at big losses. They waited out the market until spreads kind of came back, and they broke even on their pre-COVID loans, which was just a really successful turn of events for them. 97% of their portfolio, if I read the transcript correctly, is current. I believe they only have 3 or 4 assets that need deferrals at this point. So, the only thing I take exception with really is 2 things. One is, nobody's going to Jets and Giants games now. They're not permitted. So even if the Jets win a game, that stadium's still going to be empty. But I get the sense that Barry Sternlicht has never been to the Meadowlands during a Sunday football game, because if you have and you knew what the traffic was like around there, you would never, ever go to a mall near that stadium on a day where 75,000 people were watching bad football.
Well, you got to park at Reds.
Right, Reds, and take the bus.
Yeah, so Brookfield, I have to do a little bit more listening and reading on, but I remember seeing Donut Shorts tweeting about, there were some comments. It was either from Brookfield Asset Management, Brookfield Property. There's 2 entities talking about their ownership of JCPenney and how none of the JCPenney's in Brookfield Properties have failed to pay rent. We're going to do our research on that one. We'll come back to you next week.
Manis, you did the deal of the week. Do you have any others?
Yeah, the one that I gave you was the financing deal of the week. And for those that, want a quick behind the scenes look at what we do here, Martha and Keegan work on 2 really, a really nice outline every week for us to operate off of. And there's a jailbreak about 15 minutes in every week that just kind of tears up the playbook. That's what the deal of the week jailbreak was this week, talking about
Did it deal of the week jailbreak?
So our first deal of the week on the purchase side, and as listeners know, I love highlighting things in markets that are heavily hit, which means hotels and retail. The first one came to us from commercial property executive Beata Lorenz, hope I pronounced her name correctly, reported that the York Marketplace in York, PA has been sold. The property is a 305 square foot retail property that houses a Giant Eagle supermarket, a Lowe's home improvement, and a premium fine wine. The buyers were JC Bar Properties, Triple Crown Corp, and Weathervane Capital. The trio together makes up an organization called Triple Bar Group. The seller was Shopcore Properties, which bought the property in 2016. Brad Nathanson of Institutional Property Advisors repped Shopcore, and Michael Halpern and Chris Marks of IPA arranged the financing. So we love that. Obviously, that deal benefited from having really tenants in place that are indispensable right now. And I mean indispensable, right? Wine, number 1, home improvement, number 2, and groceries, number 3, in that order. Deal of the week, number 2, real estate business online. I don't have the principals involved in this that brokered this deal, but The Shops on the Circle, a 183,000 square foot retail property in Dothan, Alabama, or Dothan, Alabama, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, was acquired by Chase Properties. This one's a little bit more far afield in terms of what people are looking for as safe. The tenants here, a TJ Maxx, a Big Lots, an Old Navy, a Five Below, and a PetSmart. So other than perhaps the PetSmart, not a lot in there that is critical, yet this property sold. So congratulations and gratitude to Chase Properties for taking a bet on Alabama retail. Those are our deals of the week.
You just reminded me of that scene in Mad Men where Don Draper's putting together a big giant dollhouse out in the back for his daughter, and he keeps walking in every 5 minutes to grab a beer. So nothing better than, ordering a couple bottles of wine and trying to put together a home office desk, at the same time.
Yikes.
You end up with 27 screws left over when you're done.
Sounds like, splinters galore.
So shout outs, and we have a lot of shout outs this week. So bear with me as I run through some of them. Steel City Dave loved the UNC podcast that we had last week. Said it was one of the best guest podcasts. So he loved that. Joe D sent us an update through his contact, who happens to be his relative, Danny D, that schools in Michigan are shutting down some of their residence halls. University of Michigan is urging students who don't need to be on campus to study remotely. And he sent us the news article regarding that. I'm sure
Can we call Danny, like a smaller boat instead of the Yankee Clipper? She would be like the Yankee Skiff or the Yankee
cute.
Sloop.
Very nice. I'm sure she'd like that. Bill W. commented a couple of weeks ago about Giving Back the Keys article that we put out and loves the podcast. Minja Y loved that we mentioned Vegas in our hotel article. Edward M. Nimesh G, who's looking to get into real estate, wants advice, Manus. I gave him your direct number.
There we go. Give it a think.
C wanted to see CRE and CMBS comparison, which we sent. Lindsay C is a commercial appraiser and finds our analysis helpful. And on the subject of appraisals, Mark E, who's written to us before, says that the market has dropped so quickly that appraisal reductions seem to be a tool of the past. So that's an interesting observation on his part. And John B from Charlotte, who specializes in multifamily, sent us a very lengthy email, generally he's very bearish, not only on real estate, but the economy, but good observations nonetheless.
I loved it.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that comment about the appraisal reductions, it does tie back to our data that we talked about maybe a month ago or two, where we said the average appraisal reduction was running about 29 or 30% currently.
Those were actually just reductions in appraisals, not actually ARAs, right?
Right, value reductions. But when you talk to people about the hotel market or the shopping mall market, those reductions seem to be closer to 40 or 50 or even higher percent. So that observation that appraisal reductions could be a thing of the past, or at least a trailing indicator, could be very valid.
And of course, this week was punctuated with a holiday. So Manus, I know you had a shout out.
Oh yeah, of course. We know that many of our listeners are veterans. Many of our listeners we know personally from having been in the business for a couple of decades. And we wanted to throw out our sincerest gratitude for their service for our country prior to entering the CRE and CMBS markets. So big tip of the cap to all of you.
And we had a question from Joe in Texas on the payoff report discussion in the podcast that we had. She was wondering if the decrease in payoff rate is actually considered a good thing by investors in lower rated tranches. And I know we had some thoughts that we wanted to share on the podcast about that.
It's a very complicated question. So going back to the report itself, what we do is we measure what percentage of loans reach their maturity date and actually pay off on that date or don't. Historically, we've seen the number be about 70% of loans that get to that point do pay off on their maturity date. And there is some adverse selection in there. If a loan is really performing, chances are it would pay off before maturity date, either by a prepayment at first open or through a defeasance or some kind of yield maintenance payoff. So 70% was the historical number. For the last 6 months, we've seen numbers as low as 5%, as high as 50%, and probably an average of in the 30s. So it really has fallen off the table as hard-pressed property owners in hotels and retail properties predominantly can't get refinancing. So the question came in as to, is this a good thing for the first loss buyer? Because the loss is held off if there is to be a loss, and they get interest for several more months until the loan is resolved. And the answer I would give is somewhat complex. If the property is on the ropes and the borrower is ready to throw in the towel and no interest payment is being made after maturity date, then what is happening is the servicer is advancing. And basically what the servicer is doing is they're lending money out that will have to be repaid back later once a loan is resolved. Meaning that once a loan is sold off, either through a note sale or REO, and money is recovered, some of that money will have to go back to pay servicer advances. So in some ways, the only benefit to the first loss holder person is the time value of money. They would get some of their money now, but it would have to be paid back via a smaller recovery and a bigger loss down the road. If this is a performing property and the borrower only needs more time, and they can go 6 months where they continue to pay interest that flows totally through the waterfall, including to the first loss player, it's possible that that first loss player may get maybe 5, 6, 7 extra months of interest, and that's a benefit. But it's also possible that some of that excess interest would be offset by ultimately special servicing fees, even if the loan refinances. So thanks for the question, a very nuanced answer. And if that doesn't do it, by all means, ping us via email and we'll either hop on the phone or try to get it more into the weeds.
This is the whole thing, right? This is the whole concept of structured products and why you have to run 10 different cash flows on the same bond with 10 different assumptions to try and kind of zero in on the effect on this particular bond, given this particular outcome for this particular loan. Like there are some kind of like rules of thumb and hard and fast rules for some things, but something like that, it's hard to say. But wouldn't it also depend on, if I'm a guy and I bought a bond at a discount, a lot of my return is happening when I get paid off, hopefully at par, right? So that kind of extension of a performing property, when I bought something at 95 cents on the dollar or 90 cents on the dollar, it may get washed out by the fact that I was expecting to get that accretion of 10 or 11 or 12% on this day, and I got it 6 months later. So the time value of money could wash it out too, no?
Certainly. I think, Joe, you should be a professor. Like the way you explain these things is so thorough. You should, somebody should be paying you to teach a class.
Well, guys, believe it or not, we're about 6 weeks from the close of the year, a time that we use to perform our analysis of the good, bad, and the ugly of the last 12 months and some predictions about what's to come beyond what we did today. This year, we are inviting our listeners to participate in that endeavor, and either on or off the record, whatever you feel comfortable with, share with us your observations about this year or what you think we have yet to see, and we'll be glad to include it in an upcoming podcast.
I was thinking maybe we get either Michael Buffer or Ellen DeGeneres to do the voiceovers. Maybe, rather than me or Joe or Keegan or Martha kind of quote this like, a book on tape type thing. We can get a real
McConaughey or Morgan Freeman, maybe.
Yeah, somebody like that. Who was the guy that was Darth Vader?
Allstate guy.
Darth
James
Vader.
Earl Jones. Give it to us in the good, bad, ugly, though. For those longtime Trepp Wire readers, you know that every year we do a good, bad, and ugly review. So if you give it to us in that structure, it makes it easier for our brains to understand.
We were saying that for those that do participate, we'll send a T-shirt out. I got a shout out on the Trepp podcast, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt.
So with that, we'll close. Thanks to our producer, Keegan St. Ange. Join us next week as we look at what's happened during the week and how it may be impacting you. If you have a question or a comment, send us an email at podcast@trepp.com. For more info, visit trepp.com and subscribe to the podcast with your favorite provider. Thank you for listening and stay well.
All right.